I'm interviewing Mrs. Betty Bautz and Mrs. Christine Carr. We are at 199 North Main Street at the NECIC building. Today is Friday, July 29th, 2011. And the time is 10:11 a.m. Thank you for being here today, ladies.
You're welcome.
All right. First, just some basic questions. Were you born in Mansfield?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Why did your family originally settle in Mansfield?
Well, my mother was born here, and my dad was born in Nebraska. And he came to Cleveland to work. He was abandoned when he was 12. And so he was like a harvester when he was only 12 years old, going to Kansas and the Dakotas, which when you think about it is horrendous, right? But that's how life was then. And then when he got old enough, he came east. And he worked in the foundry, which would now be the flats up in Cleveland. And he met a fella, and the fella said, well, let's get on the interurban and go down to Mansfield because I'm going to marry a beautiful Irish girl there. And he went, okay. He didn't have nothing else to do. He rode down, right? And when he rode down, he met the sister of this beautiful Irish girl, who also was beautiful. And he married her, and she became my mother. And Joe did not marry the girl who he came to see. And so then they married here, and she was the sister of the ones that own Kramer Hotel. You're familiar with that? Okay. And that's where they had the reception. And then they moved to Nebraska. And they had a son there. And my mother hated the flatland. She just hated the flatness and no trees and whatever. So they came back to Cleveland, had twin sons right next to the old ballpark, came down to Mansfield, and work was very, very bad. So they went back, and he went back to harvesting. And then he came back, and then they had a daughter and a son out there. And then they came back, and I was the first born here. And then there's two daughters after me. And that's how that all began. And they always settled in the North End because they were renters. It was during the Depression. We were always renters.
Okay. Whereabouts did they settle specifically?
Okay, first we went on Mulberry, and that would have been actually a home owned by a relative of theirs who owned Tucker's Furniture Store. Have you heard of that?
Heard of it. Whereabouts was that?
It was Tucker's Furniture Store. Originally was over here on Main, and then they moved uptown. And they had a big home on Mulberry, which Mulberry used to be. Now it's nothing, but it used to be like big homes, like 3-story homes.
Excuse me.
And so then we rented on a place from them, and then we moved over to Lyda Street. And we moved into 125 Lyda Street, and we were like vagabonds. Okay, we were a big Irish family of 8 kids, right? And so we were living in this house, and then the house next to it became empty, 123 Lyda Street. So we just carried our stuff next door like gypsies, and we lived there. And it was just a 4-room house, and all 8 of us kids slept in one room. And there was 4 boys, 4 girls. And my dad ran a wire and strung sheets between for privacy. And there was one window upstairs. Okay, so sometimes the reason I wrote the story Dog Days of August is because we sometimes slept on the porch. And we did not think we were poor. I mean, it was a good neighborhood. It was fun. There were a lot of kids. Everybody was like us. I didn't know I was poor until I went to school. And that's where I learned that I was poor. But it didn't bother me. I had such a good, solid family background. I had a father who was, no matter how tired he was, he had time for the kids when he came home. And what he did, he worked at Tappan's, and he was laid off from Tappan's during the Depression. And then he did repair for the man who was our landlord named Mr. Downs. He left my dad repair 3 of his homes as things would break down in order for us to live there. And we did that until Dad finally, and then they ran a program, and all the fellas would go down to where the granary is, okay, and a truck would come by and pick the guys up, right, take them out to the reformatory, and they would they would work at the reformatory, not for pay, but for goods. So whatever was in season is what they would get. Like if they were picking potatoes, they'd have a burlap bag of potatoes or carrots or whatever. And that's how we survived. Mm-hmm. And we did well. All of us kids were healthy. We were small by nature, right? And we all went up to St. Pete's School. And the reason my dad did not send us to Bowman, which was very, very close, because at the time it was segregated, and my dad would not send us to a segregated school. It was against his nature to do that. Good for him.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
Mrs.
that's
Carr,
how we started.
Okay. What about your background, Mrs. Carr?
Well, my parents came from Germany in 26, and they had to be sponsored by somebody to get here. And that sponsor lived in Mansfield. So that's how we got to Mansfield, really. And I was born on Vale Avenue. We lived on 5th Street for just a year and a half or something. Then we moved out by Johns Park, corner of Woodland and Buckley.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our place to be. Went to Bowman Street School, and we all did everything at the park. And there was kids. We had Italian kids, German kids, Greek kids. They spoke different languages. And then they all came and we all played together. But once we got to the park, it was English. We weren't allowed to talk our own language. That's how we got along with each other. And in the daytime, the pavilion, they had a lady there, and we did all kinds of crafts and played games and did all kinds of things. And remember the neighbor girl had real long hair. They had a contest, the girl with the longest hair, and when it was braided, one braid down, the bottom of the braid went in her waist and the back. But I don't know whether we got mad at it or what happened one day, but we sort of cut it off halfway up her back.
You were worse than us.
Oh, yes, we did.
And the O'Learys were pretty bad.
And the park, we had ping pong tournaments. We did everything in the park. We had dances Friday night, and my dad was on the park committee, and he used to sell pop and stuff, at the dances and stuff. So we had the dances, and we did all kinds of things. We learned how to knit and how to do everything we wanted to there, really. And of course, I was a tennis champion, played tennis, was in the city tournaments, and had a good time, really. Had a good time. Played softball, but the girls' softball team didn't last very long. And so that went out, and we just did all kinds of things. And that was our life, really.
The thing about it was, all the kids were pretty congenial.
Oh, yes.
Because we all came from the same background.
Yes.
Right. and no one really had much more than the other.
We never fought.
And you just weren't envious because it sounds strange to say this to you now, but when I look at the generation now who has everything according to our life,
Yes.
they don't have as good a life as we had.
Yeah, we had nothing and we had a great time.
And we just ran and ran free, and
And
then
we
the
shared.
circus would come to town,
Yeah.
and it would come down to the tracks down by the granary and stop. Okay, and then they would unload, first they'd unload the elephants because they were the workers. And then as the people got off the train, everybody from the north end would go down there and just line the tracks, right? And
Street.
it was great. I mean, you didn't have money to go to the circus, but you've seen everything. You've seen them take off the horses, the beautiful horses, and you've seen the different ladies. Like, I remember seeing the bearded lady,
Oh, yeah.
and I remember saying to my dad, "Is that real?" And he went, "Well,
Yeah.
yeah." And I could tell he wasn't real, but he said, "Yeah, that's real, Betty." And I told him, "Well, what should I do?" And he said, "Well, you could just pray for her."
Well, I'm talking about the circus. They used to have a parade from the train station up Spring Mill Street to the fairgrounds, which was there. And I lived on Vale Avenue at the time. We used to go through the alley and watch the parade. We were just all excited.
The parade was very long.
Oh, yes.
And they would also go down to the square. They would go all the way down Main Street. People would be lined the streets forever. And it was like a holiday,
Mhm.
you know. And I don't remember anything ever happening that was unsavory. I mean, it was just, you know. And then some of the boys, the older boys, would sometimes work for the circus, like runners, you know, like water for the elephants and whatever. And it was just a good neighborhood feeling. We
So-
don't have that now.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I have wonderful neighbors, truly, where I live, but it isn't the same.
Yeah.
No.
Now the circus itself would have been held at the old, what
The
was the
old
fairgrounds,
fairgrounds,
where
yeah.
the Taylor Metal,
Mhm,
yeah,
is
yeah.
that correct?
By Taylor Metal, right,
Okay.
just at the end of Burn Street there.
Okay.
And it would be here, I don't know, 4 or 5 days a week,
Yeah.
maybe. And you could go out and sit in the grass and watch them raise the big tent.
Mhm.
And everybody did that. I mean, it was almost proclaimed like a holiday.
Mhm.
And then the music was great because we didn't have radios or anything, right? And the steam Calio, you would hear them and you'd go, "Oh my goodness," you know. And I don't remember anybody being injured, do you?
No.
And I don't remember anybody being in arguments or fights. It just was a very congenial thing.
Now, you mentioned not having the money to go to the circus.
That's right.
Do you remember what it cost to get in?
No.
No, I don't.
No.
We used to go to the end of Buckley Avenue and climb the fence.
Yeah.
And that's how we'd get in.
Yeah, you found a way in.
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
So you would get in? I mean-
Yes,
Oh,
we
yeah.
would get in.
Okay,
We
okay.
snuck in.
Okay.
To be truthful with you, we
Interesting.
snuck in.
Okay. All right, I'll let you.
But
sorry.
nobody tried to avoid you
No,
from coming in
they
either.
didn't. They didn't
They knew
stop
you were
you.
going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing about the fairgrounds, they used to have semi-pro baseball teams. And used to go up there with my aunt, and I don't know, Satchel Paige
Yes,
was colored.
yes.
He was a ball player. And I met him and talked to him, and we just had a good time with
And he
these
played
guys.
here, he came here. Later, he
Yeah.
played for Cleveland.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Wow, so you met him at the
Oh,
fair,
yes,
with the
I
old
had-
fairgrounds?
Oh, yeah, I talked to him.
Okay, so they were holding games out there?
Oh,
Is
yeah,
that the
oh,
idea?
yeah. They had
Mhm.
semi-pro
Yeah, he-
games.
They had like semi-pro games.
I
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Do you remember at all about what year that was?
Oh,
No.
boy.
No, not really.
Probably,
Oh, geez.
had to be in the 30s.
Oh, yeah.
Had to be in the 30s, maybe mid or
Yeah.
later 30s.
Definitely before he was you know,
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, he
Popular.
was just
He just
playing
get-
semi-pro, just
yeah.
like all the other guys.
Yeah.
But boy, he could hit.
Yeah, and he was a very nice person to talk to.
That's great.
Yeah.
What is your ladies' maiden names, just for the
Mine
record?
is O'Leary.
O'Leary?
Mhm.
And Miss
Schwartz.
Schwartz? Okay.
I know you already talked about a little bit, do you have any, you said you had your family of 8 children, right?
Four boys, 4 girls.
Okay, do you have any brothers and
One
sisters at
brother.
all? One brother? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you talked about it a little bit, but what was life like in your family growing up?
Well, the boys were the oldest. All my brothers sold newspapers, right? The News Journal. Okay, my oldest brother sold his papers in front of Reed's department store. The other one sold theirs in front of the Leland Hotel, and one was what you call a rover. He just sold all over Mansfield. Okay, and in the article I wrote is, okay, I was going to St. Pete's to school, and when you went to St. Pete's to school, there was a great divide, because you're going to school with doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs' fathers, right? And you were coming from a whole different atmosphere, right? And so we carried our lunch, right, every day, and I carried the same thing every day. My mother baked bread every day. My mother was meticulous. To this day, if you would walk it, and if you'd walk in my house and you laid a bunch of stuff on my dining room table, I would give you a few minutes to put it where it belonged, or you would have to pick it up off the floor. Because Mom said, to be poor is not to be dirty. To be poor is to be proud. Make yourself better, right? And that was instilled in her, and she instilled that in us. But she baked bread every day, and when you cut homemade bread, you don't cut nice thin little slices.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah, no.
You cut chunks.
Huge pieces of bread.
Yeah. So I would take like, okay, do you know what oleo is?
Back
I've heard of
when you made
it.
it yourself.
It was margarine before they colored it.
Mm-hmm.
It came in a white block like lard, and then it came with a little packet of coloring, and then you had to put that in and mix it with your
Mix it
hands
all
to
up.
make it yellow. Then your hands were also yellow.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Remember
we
that?
would take that, and my mother would make jam, anything that she could find to
Canned
do.
everything.
Okay, and to this day, this will sound funny to you, but one of my favorite things is to make ham and beans, and when the ham and beans are cold the next day, spread a slice of bread with butter, spread the beans and ham on top of it, and put a big onion on it, and hey, I'm in heaven. And that's the kind of lunches we take to school. But when we went to school, since all my brothers sold newspapers, we would take our lunch wrapped in newspaper. And to me, that was a sign of being underprivileged.
Why so? I guess that just,
Because all the other girls had lunch boxes
Oh.
or sacks. And you won't believe this, but I would actually kneel at St. Peter's Church and pray for God to send me a sack.
Yeah, I remember her telling that.
I just wanted
Oh, yeah.
a dumb paper sack, right?
Yeah.
And every Christmas, my kids give me half a dozen sacks. But it's funny how a little thing like that would impress you.
Sure.
And not to be conceited, but I was very smart at school. I now belong to Mensa, so I didn't do too bad, right? Okay. Anyway, we would take our lunch to school, right? And I wrote it in the article, thinking I was the only one. Why I thought that? Because the boys were segregated from the girls, even when you ate lunch. And so I had a friend call me, and they said, "Oh, Betty, you had it so tough." And I started laughing. I told him, well, he'd been in school with me. And I said, no, I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I'm just saying what is. And he said, well, one day, he said, there was 4 in his family, and his mother worked for a black estate, so she had to leave early. So he said his mother would pack their lunch early in the morning and set it on the counter, and they were just to each grab one as they went out. And so he grabbed his, and he said he got to school and he opened his, and he had a newspaper full of coffee grounds.
I remember that story.
Yeah. And
Oh, yeah.
he became quite successful. It's a funny thing. Many people from the North End became quite
Oh,
successful.
Quite.
Quite successful.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. We've heard.
It was the idea of always trying to climb out of a hole.
Yeah.
Does that
Trying
make
to better
sense to you?
yourself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Trying to better yourself.
Always trying to be better.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you something else too. Maybe you won't agree, Chris, but we had good manners.
Oh, yes, we had to. Yes,
Uh-huh.
we better be
Mhm.
nice to everybody.
Yes, you had to, you were nice to everybody, and you had very good manners, and you watched your words and what you said, you know. And that carried over. That was a big plus.
Mhm.
I mean, that was a gift,
Yeah.
really and truly. That became a gift to all of us from the North End. We've had people who became dentists, notary publics,
Anything,
every field,
yeah.
lawyers, every field. It's because you had to strive so hard to try to stay even. Mhm. And it's nothing against, it is absolutely, positively, nothing against the kids who came from better class family, not class, but wealthier families, because that was their station in life, and this was ours. Mhm. But we just had to try twice as hard as them. Mhm. Which is a good
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I've always taught my kids this. I remember one time my son come home, and he had just gotten a job. He was in high school, and he said, well, when he got paid, he said, well, Mom, he said, they hired a kid after me, he said, and he's making more than me. And I told him, it don't matter. You agreed when you took this job that you would work for this man for this amount of money. That's all this man owes you,
Mhm.
you know, because that's what I was taught.
Yeah.
Mhm. So we learned some good, basic human values.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Mhm. And we stuck together.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Like when we would have the dances, we would run them, what was ours, you know. And we did all this, the people from the south end of town would try to horn in on us, you know, and so we'd kick them out. And finally my dad went to the park superintendent, he knew him, and he said, you tell those kids, just stay away from out there. The same thing I used to help line the tennis, they were clay, and used to line them with the stuff, the powdered stuff, and make the lines. Well, we used to keep the tennis courts up so we could play on them. And, oh, here's some good tennis courts come out. And the funny thing was, I'd play with the neighbor kid. We would talk German. We both could. And we wanted to tell them off. We wanted to chase them out there. We wanted to tell them off, but we didn't want to be, you know. So we looked at each other trying to figure out if we knew any German cuss words. And then we said, well, I don't think there are any, so we just told them, get the out of there. But we got tired of them. You know, we did all the work, kept the place up and everything, and then they horn in on us.
Now, were you hosting dances at Johns Park? Is that
Yes,
what you're
in the
referring
building.
Right.
to? In the
Yeah.
Is it the same pavilion that's there
Yeah.
now?
Yes.
It's the same
Mhm.
building?
Yeah.
Every
Okay.
Friday night, and we had a jukebox, and we'd pay a quarter if we had it, and then they had a sheet, and we'd mark down the song we wanted to play, and then somebody'd go feed the jukebox with those quarters. And now,
But they did some really nice things for the kids.
Oh, yeah, all
They'd
the
have
time.
ice cream festivals,
Oh, yes.
strawberry festivals. They had a nice playgrounds. I don't remember. Oh, I'm sure there was some rough and tumble, you know, boys in that.
Sure.
Probably some were my brothers. But anyway, there was no what you would call rowdiness.
Mhm.
And another big advantage of the North End was the Friendly House.
Okay, tell us about that.
Yeah, and all my brothers, all 4 of my brothers, boxed at the Friendly House. And my one brother boxed in the featherweight in the Golden Gloves. But it was always, I think probably Johns Park and the Friendly House and the circus coming through and the things that were neighborhood happenings is what helped
Kept
all of us
everything.
kids to be decent human beings. Because we were not just street kids. You know, we were always doing something.
Yeah, helping everybody out.
And we kept the streets clean.
Oh, yes,
Yeah, that was a
yes,
must.
definitely.
We kept the streets clean. We didn't have to be policed by anyone. That was a natural thing, that we kept our habitat clean. So it would be nice to see that all over the city now, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
She was talking about the Watermelon Festival. My dad worked at it. And I helped serve people. And I'd go around and ask the old ladies what they wanted. They had tables and chairs out around the lawn. And so I would go get their stuff. And I'd bring them to them. And every once in a while somebody would give me some extra money. And you know, I had no idea why they gave this to me. I had no idea that, you know, they were tips or anything. And I was like, oh, you know, I stuck it in my pocket. So everybody was very nice.
And there was like almost every nationality that you could think of in the North End. There were Polish, and
Oh,
there
yeah.
were German, and there was Italian, and a Mexican
Greek,
family lived not
Greek.
too far down the street from us.
And the Greek
And-
people.
And Greek. Yeah, it was just a hodgepodge.
So at this time, was it primarily European? I mean, primarily white? What about African Americans? Were there?
Well, there was African American too, but sad to say, they lived in a little different sector, except where I lived on Lida Street. The first playmate I ever had was a little girl, and her name was Honey Lou.
Okay.
And she lived right next door to me, and the houses were so close together that it was only wide enough for a man to walk through between our 2 houses. And my dad came by an old radio, and these people's names were Ferguson's and Truly's. They were 2 families lived together. Neat, clean, polite, no different than us. And they would open, if they opened their living room window and we opened ours, we could talk back and forth. I wouldn't be as far away from them as I am from you.
Wow.
And sometimes, if my dad worked at the reformatory, and say he brought home, say, you never knew what they were going to pick. Say it was turnips. Say he would bring home like almost a half a burlap bag of turnips, and my dad would rap on the window, and he would hand them over some for their family, right? And then every once in a while, they would rap on our window, and she would have made some Parker House rolls or something, because my dad would never, ever go on relief, which now would be called welfare. He just wouldn't do it. He said he had 2 legs, 2 arms. He brought these kids into the world. He would not go on relief. We took nothing. But they did, so they would have like flour and yeast and things that they could bake, and we couldn't.
Okay.
But I actually love this little girl.
Now, to clarify, this is a black family that's
Yes.
living next to you? Okay,
Mhm.
just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure I was...
And then further down on Lida Street by, would it be Chester? Chestnut?
Chester.
Chester. Then there were black families living down there.
Okay.
And I don't remember any problem. I don't remember any problem.
Now,
It was just-
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It was just that it's almost like there was a sector that they lived in.
Yeah. And they were friends of yours.
We all played together, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding from talking to other elders in the community is that a lot of those folks lived sort of north in various parts, like the camps and the company line, which
Oh,
are,
That's right. That's
Yes.
true.
and they were
Yeah.
brought in as
Yeah,
as
that's true.
industrial workers and kind
Mhm.
of sort of maintained in that one particular
Right.
area. Is
Mhm.
that your own perception as well?
That is right.
Okay.
Mhm,
Okay.
Right. But then, like, every once in a while, there would be an empty house, like the house next to ours, and they moved in there, and there was no confrontation with that.
Mhm.
But they sort of, I think probably, no, I don't know this to be a true fact, but I think maybe they preferred to be there. Do you know what I mean?
In terms of with their own kind, is that what
Right.
you're
Mhm.
what you mean?
And they were not unfriendly to anyone, and no one was unfriendly to them, but they just had, because there was a black church not too far down Mida Street. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I remember the only time I got in trouble with my mom, seriously, is because someone said, let's go down and watch their service. You know, and we didn't care about the service. We wanted to hear the music.
Mhm.
And so we laid on the ground and looked in the window. And the music was wonderful.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, they're great.
I always tell
They're great.
when I die, I'm gonna have them play down by the river.
Oh, they were great.
At my service. No, their music was wonderful.
Yeah,
And they knew you were there.
yeah.
You know, you could see in the window, they could see out the window, they knew you were there.
Sure.
Mhm. But, no, it was, I would say, possibly you couldn't have lived in a friendlier neighborhood.
Well, talking about that, we had neighbors that were colored, 2 doors up. And they had a little girl, and my dad always sat out on the porch swing. And that was her grandpa. And she always yelled at him and everything else, you know. And I used to say, I'd hate to see him walking uptown. And they went to German church. And one of them people was there, you know, and this little colored girl would come up and grab him and say, "Hi, Grandpa." and her mother would come over and help. Well, my mom had passed away, and I went in and was cleaning, so took the curtains down and I took them to the laundromat. And when I was doing that, and I, you know, whatever else I took, and then this colored lady washed all the windows and did all that kind of stuff, so it was all ready to hang up curtains again when I came back. So she always came over and helped, and so we had real nice neighbors. And she was talking about the school, Bowman Street School.
Yeah.
I can remember, don't know what grade I was in, but they had steps that went upstairs to a room. And the colored kids went to school up there. They had their own room. I could still see this teacher walking down the steps. You know, just like she's still there.
Mhm.
And a lot of people said they didn't know that. And but they were there. They were up on the 2nd floor.
Well, and they were released at a different time.
Yeah, they weren't allowed to play on the playground with us.
Do you know,
Yeah.
that is still a sore spot with me.
Yeah.
Because it's an inhuman thing to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And my dad was, of course, my dad coming from Nebraska, there really were no black people there, right? You know, and he came here and he couldn't believe, because coming to Cleveland, he couldn't believe segregation.
Mhm.
He could not believe that you would segregate one race from another. Whereas if you were German, you were okay.
Mhm.
If you were Irish, you were okay. If you were Polish, you were okay. And he never could get that. And I have a friend, and his name is, I was just about to say it, Joe Clemens.
Mm.
And he still lives on Mida Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he would be the same age as I.
Mhm.
And we graduated high school together. And after I married a fellow from the east end of town who was German. and his folks were German. And he played semi-pro football. And I remember Joe Clemens always coming to watch my husband play football.
Yeah.
And he'd go to Detroit, and he'd go to Sandusky, and, you know, they had a nice league going. They were called the Rangers. And my husband played for them for 4 years. And so when my husband was a fireman, and he died fighting a fire here in town. And he was 53, so I've been a widow a really long time.
Yeah.
And but we were high school sweethearts, and that was enough for me, right? Okay. And so when my husband died, the very first person who walked into Wagner's funeral home was Joe Clemens.
Yeah.
And can you believe, in that time, which would have been 1980, he would ask me, Betty, am I allowed to be here?
Mm.
And I told him, Joe, if you wouldn't have come, I'd have came and got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually said to
Wow.
him, had you not come, I would have come and got you.
Yeah.
And he went. So he and I did an interview for Ron Simon.
Mhm.
And his story is amazing. And he's the one that told me about the segregated school, that like when they got out of school, they got out early and they walked on one side of the street and the white kids walked on the other side of the street.
Mhm.
God forgive us, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that is one reason I did not go to that school. Then he was telling me about the theater, and he said, because I went with my husband in high school, and he said, Betty, I always seen you and Pete in high school, and he said, Pete would go by, and he'd punch me on the arm, or he'd say, how are you, Joe? And he said, you would just smile. Well, it truly was a thing that you didn't go talk to
That's
the black.
right, not at
I mean,
school. You weren't-
Not at school.
Uh,
Isn't that a terrible thing?
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of my shame, but you didn't do it.
Mhm.
And you wouldn't have thought to do it,
Mhm.
you know. And you would have gotten them in trouble had you done it.
Right.
Right. And he said, but you would always nod, Betty. He said, you always go like this.
Mhm.
And he said, Betty, did you ever see me at the theater? And I told him, no. And he said, I saw you and Pete all the time. And I told him, you seen me and Pete all the time? How come we didn't see you? And he said, at the theater, they always had it set on one side of the balcony. Okay, everyone knew that. But he said he did not enter the theater, you know, through the doors. He went to the side, and he said there actually was like a platform, almost like 2x4, that they walked up to get to the balcony. And I said, I am so sorry to hear you say that. And he said, oh no, but it's how it was, you know.
Yeah.
And then, after he got back from the service, I asked him where he worked, and he said, Betty, why would you ask me that? And right away I knew what he meant. They all worked at Barnes, because hardly anybody could stand to work there, you know. And he said they worked there because it was sandblasting,
Mhm.
you know, like they were making tubs and sinks and toilets and whatever, and everything was sandblasted. When you walked by there, the grit would
Yeah,
come
oh,
out
yes,
and
it
hit
would.
you,
It would.
you know.
Wow.
And he said that, Betty, you notice that my eyesight is bad? And I said, yes, I thought that it always was. And he said, no, because he was in the service. He said after he got back, that he worked, you know, there. And he said the grit, they did not wear goggles. They had no protection whatsoever. And that all that would go in their eyes. And I told him, you know, it's incredible. I mean, it's incredible. And he said that when you would go to the doctor, they actually would scrape his eyes.
Mm.
And he said his father left blind from there. And he said finally he was able to leave there.
Wow.
Now, are we better now, or are we?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Can't
that-
answer it, right?
Yeah, I'd love to know the answer to that one.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's Peabody Barnes is what you're
Yes,
referring to.
yeah. Mhm.
Yes.
Now, do you remember, where was that
Yes,
at?
it was on the corner of Wayne and Fifth.
No, Fifth, yeah, Fifth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Fifth and Wayne.
yeah.
You said he had just got out of the service. Was that after World War II? Then?
Yes,
Okay.
right.